Good morning. This is Father Stephen Kelly of St. John's Church in Detroit. And we're continuing our series of daily morning and meditations, where we usually look at one or another of the readings that are assigned for morning and evening prayer, what we call the daily office lectionary. But today I want to deviate just a little bit because I want to cover saints for the next 2 days. That's one of the other things we do with these morning meditations. And what's interesting is that we have one saint for whom we don't know much about, and one saint that we know a lot about. The first saint is the saint that's actually appointed for today, and that's Saint Bartholomew. Now, what's interesting about St. Bartholomew is that we know so darn little about him. Other than him being listed as one of the followers, one of the apostles, we don't really know much else about him. He's not one of the major characters and one of the major players in the gospel stories like Peter or John or James. Or of course, good old Doubting Thomas. All of them get a lot more time of interaction with Jesus recorded for us in various Gospels. But Bartholomew has very little that's accorded about his particular personal life, other than the fact that he was one of the followers of Jesus Christ, who was named an apostle, was chosen by Jesus. And remember, the word apostle means to be sent, whereas disciple means follower. We're all disciples of Jesus Christ. We are, in fact, not just followers, but in the case of these particular people, they are the apostles. They're the ones that Jesus sent. And so it is that the apostles are now known as the successors, are the overseers or the bishops of the church. So when we talk about apostolic succession, we talk about those bishops who have had hands laid on them for them to be consecrated a bishop, who had hands laid on them, going all the way back in valid succession back to those 12 original apostles. Well, actually, 11 of them. We know that Judas did not get to the point of faithfulness, having betrayed Jesus, that he then helped to propagate the ministry of the church. Other than the fact that Bartholomew was a faithful apostle, and the fact that he was faithful to his death, the tradition is that he died in Armenia, that he went out and preached the gospel. And apparently there are some accounts that he may have had a written gospel account, but we don't have a copy of it. All we know is that a couple of the apostolic, what we call the ante-Nicene, those who wrote before the Nicene Council, writers make a mention of a gospel written by Bartholomew, but apparently was not something that was preserved for posterity's sake. The other big saint on Tuesday is the Saint Louis. Now, Saint Louis was the king of France. He died in the 13th century. He was a crusader. He helped to free those who were being oppressed in the Middle East and tried to free those in the Middle East from the oppression of the Saracens. He's gotten a lot of bad press lately, mostly by people who don't love Jesus Christ. And so it is that St. Louis has kind of taken a couple of blows by people who do not agree with him for all sorts of other modern 21st century issues. But what St. Louis was faithful to Jesus Christ. We know that when he was taken prisoner and a ransom was paid for him, he not only came back to France, but he brought back with him those prisoners who had been blinded by their captors, the Saracens, and started for them the first school and academy and place for them to live, a home for those who have been blinded. He was well known for establishing schools, including the Sorbonne, and also very interesting, Louis of France was a third order Franciscan. Now remember, we've talked about St. Francis of Assisi. We know that he gave up everything. He basically sold all that he had, gave away everything that he had, and lived the rest of his life in utter poverty following Jesus Christ. He did not have a second habit, a coat, a second pair of shoes, none of that stuff. He lived in absolute poverty so he could identify with Jesus Christ and identify with the poor to who he was ministering. And yet, not everybody could follow that severe lifestyle of the First Order Franciscans, or, of course, the women who became, we talked about St. Clare, the women who became Second Order, the nuns, but there were lots of people who felt drawn to that charism of service. And so St. Francis established a rule of life for what is known as the Third Order Franciscans. And Third Order Franciscans could be priests or lay people, nuns or lay people, could be married or single, And most of the time, third order members do not live in a community of other third order members, although in the Roman Catholic Church there are some third order communities. But the third order rule, as Francis wrote it, was for people, individuals, to follow this Franciscan charism of service and love of Jesus Christ and spreading of the gospel. And what's amazing about it is that you could have people who were the poorest of the poor who could follow the rule of life, and then you had somebody like King Louis of France who not only served the Lord in all sorts of ways and propagated his church and supported his church and was very faithful to Jesus Christ and to his people. But even though he had to wear king's garments, right, rich kingly garments for his office as king, at the same time, he wore underneath them a hair shirt, a rough, scratchy garment to make him feel uncomfortable as a penance for his sins and as a reminder of his own sinfulness and his own need for a savior. So King Louis of France was really, quite frankly, he was a saint. And, it doesn't matter how popular you are in 2020, becoming a saint is not a popularity contest. Becoming a saint is a reality of God's work in you, and you're responding to that work. So St. Bartholomew, of whom we know very little other than that he was an apostle, St. Louis of France, who we know lots and lots about, both of them in their own various ways served Jesus Christ and allowed themselves to be made holy by him. And maybe that our desire to be made holy by Jesus. I hope you have a great Monday. God bless you.